Hello and welcome to The Daily. I'm Neil Paterson, and you find me in our Westminster studio in the heart of central London, where I think it's fair to say the excitement is building. People have a spring in their step. There's a certain something in the air. The bunting is all around us. The reason, of course, the local elections are on Thursday, and everyone, myself included, can't wait. Well, look, I know one person who is absolutely cock-a-hoop. That's our deputy political editor, Sam Coates. Look, Sam, I'm not being nasty here, but you do love this kind of thing, don't you?
Yes, because we spend 364 days a year kind of trying to work out how things are going down, and it's a really important moment where voters mark politicians' homework. Voters actually mark our homework.
Yeah.
Have we got the mood right here at Sky? Are we a bit off? Are things happening in the country that we're not quite sure about? It's quite a sobering period.
OK, well, look, just in terms of what is happening on Thursday, we should probably be a little bit more specific. We're not seeing any elections in Scotland. We're not seeing locals in Northern Ireland or indeed Wales. It is just England, excluding London and a couple of the big metropolitan hubs. But there are still, masses of seats up for grabs.
That's right. So what's going on is that this is a set of elections that last took place in this constellation in 2019. And it's unitary authorities and district councils. Effectively 7 out of 10 English voters are going to be able to go to the polls in one form of council election or another.
Oh, well, that's a lot. An awful lot.
It is. And although there aren't elections in London, most other parts of the country have some kind of ballot. So it is an important electoral test. And you've got to remember what happened just a year ago. The last time we had an electoral test, Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. We hadn't had the kind of extraordinary economic turmoil, the extraordinary political turmoil. We were 2 prime ministers ago, Neil. And the world has changed, and we are trying to work out how all the main political leaders are going to fare in a new status quo that we've only had for a matter of months. And so it's a really big moment for Keir Starmer. Is the momentum behind him so he can get extraordinary momentum that he needs in order to get into number 10 with an overall majority, which would entail the largest swing to the Labour Party of all time.
No.
Do the Conservatives in Rishi Sunak have somebody who effectively the Conservative heartlands can trust a bit more than Boris Johnson and Liz Truss? And where on earth are the Liberal Democrats, given that we know that they've still got a good by-election fighting machine? But what we don't know under Ed Davey is whether or not they can cut through and make gains against the Conservatives in the way that the Conservatives are telling us that they're worried about. But we will only really know on Thursday night.
So what should we be looking for?
There are 3 metrics that you can use to judge local elections. One is what happens to big councils. Mm-hmm. And there are 230 different councils up for election on Thursday. And Tory council flipping to a Labour council is a really big moment. Often you'll have this slightly weird phrase, no overall control. A council won't have an outright majority of one party, and the parties need to work together within that council in order to work out who the leader. But that councils will go into no overall control, go out of no overall control, and we're watching for that as well. So councils is one measure. Seats is another measure. There are over 8,000 seats up for grabs on Thursday. The Conservatives still have the vast lion's share of those seats, so that they're holding the most.
Even after 2019.
Even after 2019, they hold the most, so they could potentially lose the most. So that's the second metric. And then the third metric is, and this doesn't come out for a couple of days, that's when they sort of turn the votes into percentages. And what we do is we then compare them against the national opinion polls. We work out the swing. We work out whether Labour are doing anything like as well as they should be to get the sort of 11% plus they need to get into number 10 with an overall majority. So 3 different metrics. And what they do, all our friends in the political world, is it's a bit like a magician's trick. You know, the magician's prestige. That's the moment in a magic trick where the magician gets you to look over there because the magic's happening somewhere else, or the problem that they don't want you to see is somewhere else. And so if you shout seats, they'll shout councils. If you shout share of the vote, they'll say but look at Derby. For viewers and listeners of Sky News, we're going to try and arm you as best we can to help you kind of, cut through the spin, because there's an awful lot, as you say, of expectation management. It's a bit more aggressive than I can remember it on the Labour side. And so to know what you're listening for, but always remember there are 3 different ways to measure this stuff. And you've got to keep in mind, on the night, that if they're only talking about one of them, ask, well, what's happening with the other 2?
So we will turn to Labour in a second. But we start with the Conservatives, party of government, the largest party in terms of local government as things stand. I mean, we have been hearing from, I think it was the party chairman, I think it was Greg Hands, who initially said it. Look, we are going to lose 1,000 council seats come this set of local elections. That is what we are predicting. I mean, first and foremost, is that fair? Second, given that they lost an absolute ton back in 2019, shouldn't this be the election where they're starting to pick up again?
So the person I'll be listening to, quite literally because he'll be in my ear on election night, is Michael Thrasher. He's Sky's election analyst. He's been doing the job pretty much as long as I've been alive, and he does the calculations upon which we base our analysis and knows the numbers better than anybody else. He's published books and books of local election results data. There is no better expert in Britain. He's drawn up the benchmarks that we should use. Now, he thinks that 1,000 seat losses, or more than 1,000, would be really catastrophically bad, and it would put them, in all likelihood, out of any contention of clawing back some ground before a general election, and would be difficult. 750 losses, well, that's better than the current polls. 500 losses, they might be able to cast a kind of mid-term blues. And he thinks it would be quite bad for the Labour Party if they got anything less than 300 losses. Labour really don't like this set of benchmarks. If you listen to Keir Starmer, interviewed by Sophie Ridge on Sunday, he was arguing that the Conservatives should be gaining seats. Now, gaining seats isn't anywhere on Michael Thrasher's benchmarks, but they say that because the Tories did disastrously in 2019, the last time that these seats were up, that really it was so bad that Theresa May quit a few weeks later, and this was one of the reasons why, that you should very much expect the Conservatives to do a bit better, get a bit better. And if you look on the kind of battleground of social media, there are a lot of people that are quite critical of where Michael sort of set his expectation numbers. But the truth is, when you sort of dig down into it, the reason why he's done that is very easy to understand. In 2019, when you count up all the votes, Labour got 31% of the vote. The Tories got 31% of the vote. And, Lib Dems got 17. But the two main parties were level pegging on 31. Now, you flip to today's opinion polls, and the Tories are actually quite a lot less than that. So the Tories are doing worse, and we've got the same setup. And also, when you look at which councils have seats up for grabs, well, it's by far and away the largest party with the most seats up for grabs are the Conservatives. So 3,300 odd seats, Tory-held seats, are going up for election on election day. Only 2,100 Labour seats go. So the Tories have gone backwards since 2019. There are many more Tory seats that could be lost. So it stands to reason, I think, that in that context, you can see why we ought to be having a discussion about losses, and perhaps Labour's expectation management about really we should be expecting gains is just that.
And one of the pressures that the Conservatives have had at local elections in the past has been pressure from other parties on the right, Brexit, UKIP, so on. That's no longer the case, is it? It's them or nothing.
That's right. In 2019, one of the things that was very stark was that you had a large challenge. The Lib Dems were on 17%, but others were all the way up on 17%. Brexit Party back then, and UKIP on 4%. Now, all of those kind of complicating factors have disappeared. But the other thing is just to say, Labour are doing a lot better than they did in 2019. And a lot of these are straight Labour-Tory fights, right? A lot of these seats. So again, if Labour are doing massively better and the Tories are doing a lot worse, then you are going to be in the territory of Tory losses. And so you have to take, with a massive pinch of salt, the Labour argument that really we should be expecting gains. Now, of course, the Tories are engaging in expectation management too, and 1,000 losses, even though at the worst end of Michael Thrasher's predictions, probably the Tories are repeating that joyfully because they know their canvass returns are suggesting something rather less bad than that. But I think that there is a good argument to say that you need to judge what happens on Thursday night when it comes to seats by looking at through the prism of just how many losses the Tory party are going to get, rather than even considering that they might get gains.
So what of Labour then? Expected to pick up significantly on the basis of what you've been saying?
So Labour say, well, we think that 400 gains would be a pretty good night for us. Now, again, returning to Michael Thrasher's benchmark, he thinks that wouldn't be that impressive. 450 gains would be little improvement on last year. And so it's sort of solid-ish, but not exceptional. And look, we've just got to get back to that, to the core point of where we are kind of in British politics at the moment, which is Labour need to do exceptionally well to win at the next election. Now, it's often worth thinking about a sort of swingometer. If there's a Tory to Labour swing of 3%, 3.2%, then the Tories will basically no longer have a majority, and pretty quickly you get into Keir Starmer possibly being in power. To get to being the largest party, Labour need a 6.97% swing, almost 7% swing. Now that's bigger than the one that Margaret Thatcher achieved in 1979. Yeah. And then to get an overall majority, Labour needs a 12% swing from the Tories. Now, that is more than Tony Blair got, not to get one or two seats, but to get the 179 majority in 1997. In other words, because of where Jeremy Corbyn left the Labour Party in 2019 and the utterly disastrous, worst performance since the Second World War election defeat that he took us to, other accounts from some Jeremy Corbyn allies are available to what happened that night, but it was awful in electoral numbers terms. Yeah. Keir Starmer has the most incredible mountain to climb, and to get back he needs to do exceptionally. So 400 seats, solid but unexceptional, just isn't going to cut it, and would pretty much be pointing towards not just a slightly messy hung parliament, but a very messy hung parliament where he's having to rely quite a lot on maybe the Liberal Democrats, but maybe also the SNP.
I mean, on the basis of what you are saying, could Labour actually be the largest party after all the dust has settled? I mean, that would be a huge achievement.
It'd be massive piece of symbolism. It's the first time that they would be the largest party in local government by seats since 2002. Just to tot it up, at the moment, the Labour Party have 5,823 seats in local government, and the Conservative Party have 6,603 seats in local government. Now, Labour Party aren't saying that they're even aiming for that, but, you know, if the Labour Party gained 400 seats and the Tories lost 400 seats to one another, we'd pretty much be there. And that doesn't feel impossible. So watch this space.
What about the others? UKIP, Brexit Party, not really playing, but of course we do have the Greens and, of course, you've already mentioned them, the Liberal Democrats. Now, they do very well when it comes to these short campaigns. We know they're great at by-elections. They're pretty decent at local elections as well.
There have been good Liberal Democrat local election performances, but it's interesting because at a by-election, a party can funnel all of its resources into one place. And that's been exceptionally sort of significantly successful for the Liberal Democrats in this Parliament. You know, you've got a string of by-election successes in the last couple of years, sort of unnerving the Conservatives. But when you have a local election and you're campaigning in, you know, so many more different parts of the country, you know, the Liberal Democrats are contesting 1,200 seats. So that's quite a lot less than the 3,300 of the Tories. But still, you're having to fight across lots of different parts of the country. You're much more reliant on what the core message is from your party leader, how much prominence the party's managed to get in the media, and what the sort of wedge policy issues, what things have cut through, and it is just a bit harder for the Liberal Democrats at the moment, partly because they just have less prominence than they did when they were the third biggest party in British politics.
Much less prominent.
But also because post-2019, there isn't quite the clear dividing line on something like Brexit. They're not promising to undo it. There are some cost of living promises, but it's not. There isn't the sort of single issue like there was with tuition fees in 2010, the opposition to the Iraq War in 2005, better public services in 1997. There are election campaigns, pre-election campaigns, where you absolutely know what they were doing, what they were standing for, but not perhaps. And I'm sure they shout at me a bit for this, but not perhaps so distinctive this time that everybody knows that the Liberal Democrats stand for X. And so if the national campaigning message is weaker and your resources are spread a bit thinner, and Lord Sainsbury, who did fund the last general election campaign for the Liberal Democrats, does look like he's funneling his resources back into the Labour Party, and that could leave quite a big hole. I think that all of that does mean that they, that they start with less of an advantage, but the Tories are still worried about them. And, a good night for them will be 150 seats or more. And there are some councils where they could knock the Tories off overall control, make some progress. They may even knock the Tories off their perch in Windsor, which is, of course, sort of Maidenhead territory, home of the king, just the kind of place that you absolutely associate with being true blue.
I mean, we were talking earlier about Theresa May, and I'd totally forgotten the fact that one of the reasons that her departure was ushered in was of course the local election results. Look, I mean, Rishi Sunak, it seems to me, is embedded in number 10 until the next general election. I'm wondering if you feel the same, no matter how this goes. I mean, if it is as disastrous as Greg Hand suggested, I mean, there will be knives out for him.
What's been fascinating about the last 5 months of British politics is the degree to which the Conservative Party has decided to self-stabilise a little bit, and if I'm being honest, more than I expected. So a couple of things have been quite key. He managed to bring the party together over Brexit. Now, that's a difficult sentence to have imagined saying 6 months ago, but he did. He's looked more polished, more grown up than Liz Truss, currently fighting over whether or not she nicked bathrobes from one of the Grace and Favour mansions, and Boris Johnson, upon whose verdict, whether or not he lied in his resignation honours list, and whether or not he's going to put his dad in the Lords. I think all of that is very consciously in the background, and the Tories have united a bit more and decided that maybe if they kind of line up behind Rishi, there's a bit more chance of winning, and the job of the Labour Party is to go, hang on, this is a Conservative Party that has ended up having a Prime Minister who's been at the beck and call of a party that has wanted wild and wacky and wonderful things for the last 13 years. Don't let that continue, and driving that message home. So the bottom line is, no, I don't expect, even if these results are bad, Rishi Sunak to have a particularly difficult time after that. I think the problems that he will face come around the fact that he's got pretty clear campaigning messages and campaigning targets and his five pledges, but they're something quite hard to deliver. And I think that's his next big problem. I actually think that the biggest thing in this election is an all-round 360 kind of multi-dimensional test of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Yeah. And in particular, if there are bits of the results that allow people to claim that you just don't quite have the momentum that you really need to get that overall majority because the mountain is so high, how they all cope with that. And I think you can often judge with quite a lot of insight into the real mettle of a political party in the kind of few days after a local election. I always love the moment the polls close and the next 5 days after that, rather than an election campaign. Election campaigns are a bit dreary because everyone stays on message most of the time.
They're also incredibly tiring. Let's not forget.
Oh, yeah, no, and Keir Starmer had a horrendous 2021, a pretty good 2022, and it's just going to be interesting to watch whether this politician who would fully admit to you in private that he's been learning on the job, it could handle a nuanced story of solid positive advance, but not spectacular, with people wanting spectacular. How do they capitalise on that? And I think watching that will be the most interesting thing from Thursday night onwards.
If push, Sam, three places that you might urge us to keep an eye on. I'm having a careful look, I would say. Plymouth, Darlington, both looking to go Labour from no overall control. I think those will be interesting to keep an eye on myself.
Swindon, absolutely key general election area. At the moment, that's Conservative control. YouGov have it leading Labour. It just is a great, bellwether place to keep an eye on. Derby. Now, Derby is the scene of some of Keir Starmer's greatest local election disasters, particularly in 2021. It has gone. They lost it completely back then. He needs to be doing better in the West Midlands. And then anywhere around the Tees Valley, Darlington, places like that. So at the moment, Darlington has no overall control, but the YouGov projection has Labour making big gains and now is leaning Labour. So those are some of the places that I'm watching. I think you've asked about cancels. I'm going to come back to my very first point. There are 3 ways in which you can judge local elections. Seats. Does the Conservative Party lose its tag of largest party in local government and Labour rotate them? Councils, we've just gone through. And then vote share, which you don't get inconveniently for 48 hours until after the close of result. Those are the 3 ways. And if a politician only talks about one, nudge them about the other 2.
I certainly will. Sam, many thanks. Well, that is your lot for today, but we do have a special episode due out on Friday afternoon, when we should have all the results in. We will be unpacking everything you need to know, so just set a reminder for that one. My thanks again to Sam Coates, and of course to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. This episode was produced by Emery Woodhouse. Our editor is Philly Beaumont.